I am delighted and proud to welcome Dr. Shirley Jackson Whitaker in a discussion with three distinguished panelists, moderated by Meredith, the curator for our Bromer Gallery. I was first introduced to Shirley through her powerful, deeply moving book, Ashes to Ashes, which remembers and honors through original etchings and letterpress printing those people who were lynched in America. When Shirley's exhibit of her book, as well as her prints, her drawings, and her paintings, opened at our gallery in January, I had the opportunity to meet and immediately wanted to embrace her. She is an open-hearted person, emitting a generosity of spirit, which is apparent from the moment you meet Shirley. She believes that African-American life is part of American history and culture. It is not separate from, but infused into the greater community of our society. Shirley uses her talents not only to heal those who are ill, but to focus us through her art on the dignity and beauty of her heritage and her people. We are so fortunate to host her wonderful exhibit and now this hour or so of conversation. Thank you all for being here. It's my pleasure to turn this gathering over to Meredith.
Thank you, Anne, as always, and thank you to you all for joining us from all over the country, it turns out. It's thrilling to have you. As Anne said, and as some of you know, I'm Meredith Santos. I'm the gallery manager here at Bromer, and I'm the curator of Shirley's exhibit, which is titled An Artist's Reflection on African-American Life, Culture, and Trials. And if that's a mouthful, this exhibit is certainly an eyeful. Some of you can see behind me. I did the best I could to show what I could. And I'll also take the time to note that this is a commercial exhibit and things are for sale. I'd like to start us off this evening by introducing our delightful panelists. And following that, I'll allow them to speak for themselves. As each one speaks, I'd welcome all of you in the audience to ask questions in the chat. I will be monitoring that and collecting them, and then I'll bring them up when we reach the discussion portion of the evening, which I'm hoping will be most of the event. One other housekeeping note, it is good Zoom etiquette to please keep yourself muted just throughout, and except for our panelists, obviously, who will be coming off and on as it suits them. Now to introduce our first panelist, Shirley Jackson Whitaker herself. Dr. Whitaker is, of course, the artist whose work is on display here at Bromer, but she's also a practicing nephrologist and an activist in the Western Massachusetts region. Her community work focuses on drug education, hypertension information, prevention of violence against women, and making medical concepts comprehensible to laymen. The highlight of the current exhibit, Ashes to Ashes, is an extension of her passion to bring conversation and community together over challenging topics. Our next panelist is Michael Kutch, who helped Dr. Whitaker realize Ashes to Ashes as an editioned book. He works in a variety of media, including sculpture and painting, and with a focus on etchings for his Double Elephant Press. Our third panelist is Dr. Barbara Krauthammer, who is Dean of the College of Humanities and Fine Arts and Professor of History at UMass Amherst. She's a leading historian of slavery and emancipation in the 19th century American South and prides herself on her devoted mentorship and innovative leadership. In addition to her teaching responsibilities and award-winning publications, Dr. Krauthammer is a force behind the creation of opportunities for Black women in higher education. And finally, to close us off, will be Dr. John Buchtel, who is curator of rare books and head of special collections at the Boston Atheneum. There, he oversees the curatorial team, exhibition programming, collection development, and the Atheneum's rich holdings, which range from medieval manuscripts to contemporary artist books. And now, without further ado, Shirley, will you lead us off?
Thank you all for coming. So where do you start? Where did I start? I realized that art has always been a part of my life. I look back over things I did when I was 4 and 5, and I realized I was creating some form of art. The first thing I can remember making was some dolls out of grass. And later, in talking to people, I realized they said the method I was using was one that the slaves passed on to their children, and as their way of having dolls to play with. And so when I asked my family, I asked my sister, Dot, when did we start doing this? No one could tell me other than the fact they felt it was passed down. And then I talked with someone from Uganda, I think, and she said, oh, it's very common. We make those kinds of dolls. But we made them. And so when I look, and I think that some form of art has always been a part of my life. When I was in the first grade, I didn't grow up with clay, but in the first grade, the teacher let us mold with clay, and I thought it was just miraculous. You could take something and you can make something out of it. So I think art has always been part of my life. I think that sometime when I was in school, when I was in a situation that I wasn't happy in, I would find myself sketching. I think I've gotten better since Michael has given me some direction, but I look back and I really became far more into doing some form of art was when Nate went to UC Berkeley to get his graduate degree, and I was there doing my medicine. And the Bill Cosby show was on, had all this Black art, and I wanted Black art and I couldn't buy it. So I decided to paint it. So I got a book and I got some paint and I started painting. And eventually everything I paint, I would give away because I was so excited. It looked like something real. And it got to a point, my husband says, I think you should start keeping your pieces because I think you're getting better. So I've always found the time to include some form of art in my life. And I look back now and it's been a diverse of pieces that I've worked in. The sketching with pencil on paper, which the etching, which I learned to do at Michael, three-dimensional. I call them three-dimensional. I thought when the first time I did a three-dimensional piece, I thought I was doing a collage. I've never been formally trained in art. Didn't know the language, but collage sound nice. So I decided to try to do a collage. And I glued all this thing on a canvas, like the one piece behind me. I put cotton on there. My husband said, why do you feel the need to glue stuff on your canvas? Because when I first started, I thought I was doing a collage. So I still continue to do it. At the piece that's behind Meredith, at the top is this piece with a lady with flowers on. It's simple, but it allowed me to express my love for hats. And in the Black community in the church, hats are a big thing. And I've always found a way to include hats in a lot of especially my three-dimensional work that I call three-dimensional, my so-called collage. And etchings, but I have done some charcoal. I've only done one piece, and after that piece, I didn't think I would ever do another piece of charcoal because I didn't know that the fine pieces of the charcoal went everywhere. It was on everything. What a mess! But that piece turned out to be pretty good. And some people have thought that was one of my best pieces, but it's so huge, but nevertheless. So I've done charcoal, sort of what I call three-dimensional or my homemade collage, and the etching of course, that I hope I'm getting better at that. Etchings can be real tough. One of the pieces that I did for the Ashes to Ashes was a tree trunk, but that was, so it can be various steps to that. And it demands, in order to come out with a final piece, each one of those stages, you have to do, top quality stuff. And work with Michael, he demands that. So, but I think hopefully I'm getting better. And the pieces like behind you, I've done several with, women, especially sort of giving honor to women that have made contributions to this society, like Shirley Chisholm, which was one of the paintings behind Meredith. One was Ida B. Wells. Chloe, the one that is an etching I did of the name, she wrote Beloved. Her real name is Anthony Chloe, and I blanking on her, the name everyone knows her by, but I know her. I did this etching of Chloe. And so I've done different pieces with different emphasis. I've done several pieces of Black life, African-American life, with the church being an instrumental part, different aspects of the church. Women going to church is in that show with two ladies. And of course, they had on hats. I've done others that are not in the show that include the usher board. The usher board is not usually talked about, seen in paintings. You see paintings about the Black church. You see the minister with his hands with a robe on and the choir behind them swaying, but they don't include the usher board. So I did one to include the usher board because my mother was in the usher board, which I thought was a big deal. And it was a big deal. And some other things of life in the Black community, the ones of men going, the barbershop. The barbershop is an instrumental part of the Black community. And although I didn't hang out at the barbershop, I know a lot of men go there and spend all day Saturdays at the barbershop. And I love, it was a gathering place. It's one place that Black men could go and find a place to express themselves and be themselves. And I love that. So in this show, I did two pieces. One of a little boy getting his hair cut, which I call the first cut. And that, again, in the Black community, that is a big thing. The second is men playing checkers. They say my father-in-law on the weekend will play checkers all day, and he's renowned for being excellent checker player. So I did those pieces because that was a part, is still to this day, instrumental part of the Black community. When they wanted to educate people about COVID, they went to the barbershop. I know studies have been done of people having their blood pressure monitored at barbershop. So I felt that that was instrumental, an important part of the Black culture. Other things I've done is field work. Like the painting behind me is of the cotton field. And that's why so many African Americans are here, because of cotton. So I felt it was imperative that I do a painting involving cotton. There's one in this show of a lady shelling peas. I know some of y'all have never shelled peas, but here, let me tell you, it's not an easy thing. It looks like little cute peas. They're so simple. But by the time you do about 10 of those, your fingernails get very soft, because inside of once you get the pea out, the inside of the the shell is very moist and it tend to make your nails very soft. I didn't like it. And in that painting, you see she has about 5 or 6 loads of peas to shell. But most of the time, people in the neighborhood will come and help you do that. They'll gather there and help you to do that. They did the same thing with peaches, which I didn't like either. Peaches, real peaches, have fuzz on them. And when they get on your skin, it can be very irritating. So when I see my father coming with a bag of peaches, I was not happy, but I had no choice. So those are some I try to put into classifications of the type of work that I've done. So hopefully tonight, if you have any questions about what I've done and how what I think I'll be doing in the future or what I am doing now, that would be a nice thing to talk about.
Thank you, Shirley. I'm sure those questions will come up about what's next and certainly what you're doing now. And now to Michael.
Hi, well, thank you, Meredith, and thank you, Ann Bremer, for inviting me and all the people behind the scenes. And thank you all for coming. Shirley and I met nearly 3 decades ago. We were just toddlers back then. No, actually in the 1990s, I had graduated from Hampshire College and had been working for my mentor, Leonard Baskin, printing etchings for his Gehenna press and learning about this world of artist books, as well as starting my own double elephant press. The printmaking studio was in a walled-off corner of a great Piranesi-style New England barn at Lisa and Leonard Baskin's home in Leeds, Massachusetts. Lisa had seen Dr. Whitaker's artwork through a mutual friend of theirs, and Shirley was doing these marvelous large paintings with the collaged elements that she was talking about, and a couple examples in the show. And Shirley was invited to come out to the printmaking studio in Leeds and learn to make etchings. Shirley would later confess to me that she had no idea what an etching was. Since I was the one hanging out in the printmaking studio, I gave Shirley some technical instruction on the process of making etchings. She did lovely work, and Shirley was self-taught, and this might have been the end of this story. Leonard died in 2000, and I had my own studio by then, and life galloped on. Years later, around 2015, Shirley expressed an interest in getting back into making etchings. I explained that she could do that, but there really was no market for selling etchings. However, she might want to consider making a book of etchings. I explained to her that there was a small group of extraordinary people called librarians, and they actually bought books. So around this time, Shirley was putting together her Ashes to Ashes celebration in a historic Black church in Springfield, Massachusetts. And the idea there was to give last rites to all the souls who had perished during the long and terrible history of lynching in our country. And the service was part funeral, part performance, part celebration, and importantly, last rites. I think part of, dare I say it, the genius of the event was to put this commemoration in the form of a funeral. The most moving part was when Shirley had members of the audience who were actors dressed in clothes of their time stand up and give testimony to what had happened to them, how they had been brutally lynched. It was one of the most moving experiences of my life. We all remember funerals we attend, and this was a funeral that was replete with ghosts to tell their own stories. Blown away by the event, I said to Shirley, well, if you're going to do a book, it needs to be about ashes to ashes. The celebration/funeral had a Xerox program with it. The idea was to redo the program as an artist book. It would include an example of a hymn, I've Been Buked, that was performed, and the eulogy that Dr. Whitaker gave, and the sequence of speakers and performances would be printed over an etching of Shirley's interpretation of stained glass from a window at the St. John's Church that I had printed in color. For the testimonies given by the ghosts, Shirley would invent portraits. Their words would be printed below each portrait. However, a window cut out of the preceding blank page in the book would reveal only the portrait first to the reader. And this would replicate the effect of the actors in the audience standing up and the audience not knowing who they were until they started telling their story. At this point, Shannon, do you want to put up that slide that I sent? That was my special code to Shannon. Here we go. Is it? There we go. And make that full screen. So in the original program of Ashes to Ashes, there appeared a list of names of people who had been lynched. Shirley had used the shape of a noose that she had drawn to create a blank knockout in the list of names. In other words, the white of the page became the image of a noose against the backdrop of the list of names. For the book, we wanted to include a broadside that would have the list of names, and we landed on the idea of an image of a hanging tree and eventually got rid of the noose altogether. The idea being that a tree could be both an image of the manner of death, but also life-affirming. It turned out that the list of names on the original program was just a fraction of the whole list compiled by several researchers. Thus, the tree needed to be quite large, taking up nearly the entirety of the equivalent of 4 pages of the book, while using the smallest legible size type, I think about 8 points. I printed the etching on a beautiful gray paper, handmade paper by Katie McGregor of Whiting, Maine, and had my friend Mark Tuckman of New York City get the list of names justified on the computer and ready to be made into a polymer plate. And the list of names was then expertly overprinted from the polymer plate by Arthur Larson in Hadley, Massachusetts in silver-colored ink. And the juxtaposition of the large tree, which you see here on the slide, and the tiny type imbued the tree with a kind of shimmering gauze that was only recognizable as a list of names of those who perished upon close inspection. In conclusion, you can get rid of the slide now. In conclusion, it has been an enormous pleasure to work with Shirley. I think one thing not to be overlooked in her art is a wide variety of talents that she brings to it. Back in 2016, I asked Shirley where she got the text for the testimonies given by the actors in Ashes to Ashes the celebration. She said she just wrote them herself. To call Dr. Whitaker a visual artist is certainly an understatement. She is nothing less than a force. Her great optimism and strength of spirit is contagious and remains unshaken no matter how bad the news gets. And the news does seem to get very, very bad these days. But as Shirley is quick to point out, the news has been very bad for African Americans for a very long time. I just want to thank Shirley for the great joy she has brought me and my family. It is truly wonderful working with her, and I'm excited about the new work from her Saw Press as we press forward. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Michael. When we first were thinking about this exhibit, and I met Shirley and Michael together at the same time, I think the rapport between the two of you is really just a sight to behold, and it was definitely a joy to see that just to start right off. So move on now to John.
I'm happy to go. I think we did discuss having Barbara
You
go.
did, yes. I definitely made a mistake. Thank you for catching that. So never mind. Barbara, will you go? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Meredith. Thank you, Anne, for inviting me. Thank you, John, for keeping us organized. It's a real pleasure to be with everyone tonight, to have the chance to talk about Dr. Shirley Jackson Whitaker's work as an artist, right? We could spend a whole session talking about her work as a physician, as a community organizer and community leader, but talking about her artistic work tonight. One of the questions that I just want to leave open that maybe we can pursue in the Q&A period after this is I was thinking of wondering what the artistic influences were. I mean, I know amazingly, you know, the idea of being a self-taught artist is just phenomenal to me, given everything you've accomplished. But I wonder if, you know, in your lifetime, in your childhood, in your adulthood, of creating and appreciating art, if there were any artists or artistic styles that you felt spoke to you, because certainly when I look at your work, you know, it speaks to me. And so I thought that's what I would focus on this evening. It's the images of women, Black women, right, in your work, and the way that you portray, you know, both our physical selves, but also I think what's remarkable to me about your work is that our inner selves are revealed in ways. And I was thinking particularly about how your portraits, some of which people can see over Meredith's shoulder there, really speak to depict and evoke the dignity and the power and the intellect and beauty of Black women across time. And I think that that's really important for people to recognize when we understand, as you mentioned in your comments, a long, centuries long, up to the present day, system and history of devaluing Black women as intellectuals, right, as political actors, denying Black women as beauty, right, that the concept of Black women as beautiful is still, in many respects, in our society and other societies, a concept that many people struggle with, right, to imagine Black women as images of beauty, as intellectual figures, as people worthy of dignity and humanity. And I think, you know, we don't have to look any farther than the Justice Jackson's Supreme Court confirmation hearings over the past couple of days to see that in action in our own moment of how Black women's intellect and accomplishments and beauty and dignity is routinely denied in the mainstream society. And so what's powerful to me when I look at your paintings is that that's just unquestioned, right? That's the baseline, right, of beauty and dignity and authority. And one of the things that struck me on thinking about tonight was that you've created, and I would love to hear you talk more about your thinking about this, that you've created images of both well-known women and women who, at least in the context of the paintings, are unnamed, but I suspect are named and have full histories and identities and lives in your mind and your knowledge. So I thought, Shannon, maybe if you can put up the picture of Shirley Chisholm, if you have that one. I know it's over Meredith's shoulder, but if you have it and we can see, yeah, there we go. Yeah, perfect, right? So, you know, a leading political figure is Shirley Chisholm, and what I love about this is she's holding that folding chair, right? And for people who don't know, Shirley Chisholm once said, right, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair, right? Which is, I think, a real powerful message for Black women and girls in particular, right? That if the mainstream society doesn't make space for you, make your own space, bring your own chair, and don't let anyone take your voice, take your authority, or deny it. So that to me is really just one of my very favorite pictures. Also, and I think the hands are really good in this one, Michael. I don't know what you think, but I think the hands are really good in this one. One of the things that I also like about this for me is that it's evocative in many ways of an area related to my research of the history of African-American photography in the 19th century, and that there's this lovely flower arrangement in the background that Shirley Chisholm is in a very formal, proper, dignified white dress that's very evocative of the 19th century, not the 1970s. And that it's an image of her that's less about capturing sort of the minute details accurately of her face or of her body, but again is about, for me at least, is evocative of a much larger history of Black women activists, Black women in politics. And, you know, the juxtaposition with the flowers in the background reminds me of images of Sojourner Truth, right? And Sojourner Truth, who would pose for photographs in a way to present herself as a dignified woman, right? With an emphasis on her femininity, right? In an era when Black women were denied the protections and luxuries of womanhood. Sojourner Truth would pose for photographs with a vase of flowers next to her, with an open book on her lap, with her knitting, right? And so on the one hand, she was a powerful political force, a powerful intellectual force in the 19th century, but also wanted to underscore her femininity, her womanhood. And so to me, this picture of Shirley Chisholm speaks to that, right? To that sort of multi-layered history and experience of Black women. And then there were a couple others. Shannon, if you can pull up the church ladies, the one that's two above that in your slide deck there. Yep. So this I love. You mentioned the importance of hats in Black women's lives in Black culture. Certainly, of course, the importance of church. But I was thinking as I was listening to you speak, that church in Black communities is often a physical place, but often exceeds the physical house of worship. And that church can also be experienced as community, right? As relationships. So it's both a physical building, but it's also about the community and the relationships and the bonds that women have with each other and with the members of their communities. And again, thinking about the hats, in this picture and some of your other works, you know, there's a long tradition of Black women adorning their bodies, but especially their hats and their hair again, coming out of a society, coming out of an experience through the 19th century into the early 20th century, when Black women's hair was not considered beautiful, when Black women were often forced to have their hair cut as a punishment during the period of slavery, when they weren't allowed to adorn themselves and celebrate their beauty, and nonetheless found creative ways using shells, beads, vegetable dyes to decorate their clothing, to create beautiful head wraps for themselves, to create jewelry for themselves, and really, again, to celebrate their own beauty and dignity. And so when I see this picture too, and so here I wonder if there probably are real life women in Dr. Whitaker's life and history that inspired these images of women who are unnamed in the paintings. And then I'll just end by pointing out the other thing that for me has some real historical resonance are the images of children, both the drawing of the little girl with her braids from the etch. I don't know, Michael, if it's an etching or a drawing, but you can probably teach me a lot about etchings. But yeah, this picture, right, where she is just beaming, right, incredibly joyful, and the little boy getting his hair cut that Dr. Jackson referenced in her opening remarks, and again, I think, and that face. And again, I think it's so important in these works of art that we see children as children, especially in, both past and present, when Black children are often regarded by the mainstream society not as children, right? Not as little people worthy of protection, who should be able to enjoy play and fun without being considered suspect in some way, right? And we know from the research that Black children are perceived as older, more mature, and than they actually are, and certainly cast as threats instead of as innocents. And so these pictures to me, again, are really evocative of what we know in our own communities and families, right? That our children are children, and they are grumpy about going to the barber and getting their haircut sometimes, and they are joyful and full of play and love. And so, as I said at the beginning, what I like about these pictures and how they really speak to me is that you've presented both the physical manifestations of our lives, but I think have also revealed the interior lives, both emotionally and the relationships that we share with one another. So I'll stop there and just say thank you for sharing your vision in your work. And it is certainly the case, as Michael said, that Dr. Whitaker is a force in all she has accomplished. But also, I think, and one of the things that I really treasure about you, Shirley, is a force for bringing people together, right? That you are like have the gravitational pull on so many of us and bring us together. And I think inspire us, and really sometimes push us to do more and do better, right? To do more better. And I want to thank you for that, and thank you for sharing your work and your vision.
Thank you very much, Dr. Krauthammer. And I think it's hard to envision the historical threads that really run through this exhibit, but you really brought them out very well, even in just calling out 4 pieces. And hopefully, from what also folks could see behind me, there's this really intense, almost emotional experience of walking in here into just this room of portraiture that covers so much time and space. And thank you very much for really articulating what that response really means and what what it means to us. So finally, and correctly now, I will turn it over to John.
Thank you, Meredith. I'm humbled and honored to be here tonight. And thanks to Shirley for being the reason that we're gathering. As Dr. Krauthammer says, she is someone who brings people together, and that's a beautiful thing. And thank you to Meredith and to Anne for inviting me, and thank you, Michael, for introducing me to Shirley's work. So I'm the curator of rare books and head of special collections at the Boston Atheneum. I've been here since 2018, and my curatorial practice as a curator is about a number of different threads that come together in different ways. One of those is about books as physical objects. One of those is about books as objects of beauty. And then another thread that I'm especially humbled to be able to be a part of is about identifying hidden presences in our collections wherever I happen to be a curator, and about helping to collect under-collected or underrepresented people and groups in our collections. And when Michael and Shirley were working on Ashes to Ashes, I was just wrapping up a 10-year stint at Georgetown University, and coming off of a real high in that latter category, I had been privileged to take part in helping to bring back together the lost archive of a really important 20th century African-American woman composer, Margaret Bonds. And Shirley, we were talking about music before this all got started. Margaret Bonds, as some of you may know, collaborated extensively with Langston Hughes. Her setting of He's Got the Whole World in His Hands is one of the settings that is familiar to many of us. Right as I was leaving Georgetown, the university had the archive had been cataloged, everything had been brought back together, and they even had a world premiere of some of her music that had never been performed. So it was incredible. And I was thinking, how am I ever going to top that at the Atheneum? And Michael told me about your book, and I got to see images of it, and I wound up making that order before I started. My first day was June 4th, 2018, and I had already ordered the book. It was my first acquisition for the Atheneum, and I feel honored to be able to say that. It's a beautiful book. Ashes to Ashes, as Michael described the service, I wish I could have been there in Springfield for that day. But the book is moving. It's beautiful. It exhibits everything that I look for in an artist's book. Well-chosen materials, well-executed printing. The book is a pleasure to hold. It's a pleasure to turn its pages. It's cohesive. It's a work in which the craft and the concept come together, and they form a whole that is greater than the sum of their parts. If you experience it or parts of it just as a digital image, or if it were ever to be facsimiled as an industrially published book, the experience would not be the same. As a handcrafted object, it has a power to it. And of course, it's a very difficult book too. It's full of raw emotion, and it's something that forces the reader and viewer to grapple with difficult things, and for some of us, difficult truths that we may not have thought much about. and it makes them present and real in a way that for many of us, we may not realize that these are still living histories. And Shirley, you bring that out so well in the documentary in your conversations with Winfried Rembert. And in Bromer Gallery, right there in the middle of the gallery, are a couple pieces of his work in the as covers for the deluxe copy, one of the deluxe copies of the book, and it's he as a survivor of lynching and only recently passed. This is something that still affects our culture today. Shannon, if you could bring up that image of the tree again, the tree etching and broadside to me is just such a powerful piece. On the screen, it looks small to you, but in person, it's bigger than the screen. It's quite a bit bigger. It folds out from the book. It's separate from the book, but also part of it and integral to it. And it's just a stunning piece of printing. It's amazing to hear Shirley and Michael talk about the decision-making that went into it. Something else you can't really get from the screen is that the names are printed in a kind of a silver ink. And when you stand back from the print at 10 paces, you don't realize you're looking at a list of names. You think you're looking at a tree. And this is something that I think, Shirley, you do so powerfully, is to help us see things through different eyes. And for me, at the point when I first encountered this print, I had been thinking for a long time about the possibility of curating an exhibition on the subject of representations of trees in contemporary artists' books. And the main angles I was thinking about are trees are beautiful things. I love trees. They don't have negative connotations for me, even despite the fact that one of my favorite scenes is in The Hobbit is when Fellowship of the Ring is when the hobbits are almost eaten by a big scary willow. But just to be reminded that we don't all see things the same way. And this tree is a witness to the lynchings that were perpetrated on it. This tree, you don't see a noose in this image, but the tree saw it. And all of those names on the screen were victims of that noose. So it's a very, very powerful and moving piece, and very beautiful. And part of what I love about your work, Shirley, is that you use beauty to make us think and to help to slow us down, to sidetrack us from our busy day to day. You page through a book, and part of the power of an artist's book is to sit and slow down, to work through a piece. Shannon, can you move us 2 slides down to the portraits there? The portraits in the book are equally powerful and moving. Beautiful artwork that helps us as readers to think about tragedy and to think about the fact that these are the victims of lynching are real people, were real people, beautiful people who had beautiful stories. By juxtaposing their portraits with their stories and putting those stories in their own words, we encounter them not just as names, not just as faces, but as vivid personalities. So I should wrap up so we have time for questions, but just a couple thoughts to leave us with. This is a work that is not just for any one community. This is a work that is for all of us. It helps to raise important, challenging questions without performing last rites and going through the formal mourning process. Can we find peace over the loss of the victims? Without confronting historical injustices and cultural sins, as this book helps us to do, can we as a society ever truly repent? And another difficult question, perhaps from the other side, without repentance, is true forgiveness possible? These are important questions for us to grapple with. And it's so wonderful to be able to see Ashes to Ashes in the context of some of Shirley's other artwork. Her portraiture reminds me of some of the works by Alan Rohan Crite here at the Athenaeum. Portraits that depict real emotion. We've seen we don't have to go back to them necessarily, but we saw the boy in the barber shop, the girl hiding behind the curtain with her beautiful hair, and just the sprightly, impish look on her face. These are portraits that depict regular people, real people, and ordinary situations, as Dr. Krauthammer said, as dignified and as meaningful. Shirley's work is about our common humanity. It's about cultivating mutual understanding. It's about encouragement, and it is about healing. Thank you.
Thank you, John, for what I think was a really touching and I also a very personal take on Shirley's work, because really there is almost no way to look at it without it being personal. And I say that as someone who has looked at this every day for almost every day for the last few months. And every time I look at it, it feels like it's there for me, which is kind of a strange experience, but also a really wonderful one. And you also, which I think leads well into questions, is you brought up the idea of Ashes to Ashes, and also Shirley's work in general, as a work that is a series of decisions. The decision to print in silver ink, the decision to have the tree there at all, with names or with a noose or nothing. And so to think about her work as a series of decisions that lead toward beauty and personality and towards really inner challenge and towards healing. I think to get at those decisions, we can start with the question that Dr. Krauthammer raised, which goes to Shirley. And that is, what are your artistic influences?
I think that the core is where I grew up in my family. I think I've always been very sensitive about my surroundings and how important they were to me. I mean, I didn't like shelling peas, but I needed to do that painting. And because I felt those people was a part of my world, and bringing them alive in a painting meant a lot to me. So I think that incorporating what I lived and what I'm living now and putting on a canvas, and with the hope that it has some meaning to it. I mean, I can't predict when I put it up there that it's going to say something to somebody. I just can only put what's in me on a canvas, and hopefully someone can sense something with meaning from that. And I put it up, and when I I know when I'm feeling right about it. When I'm doing Shirley Chisholm, I know how I wanted to present her. I wanted her in a white dress. So I knew that I wanted her to be presented in a respectful way. Even those the painting of these young men picking cotton behind me in that painting, I wanted to respect them and not demean them, because they were making contributions to my life. And so I think that's the core of what I do and why I do it. And when I look at something, if it moves me and make me think and make me feel, I try to see, can I put that on a canvas? And I'm learning how to do that. I'm not there yet, but I'm hopefully getting better.
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of a really neat part of this exhibit is that we have things from all stages of your career. That church lady painting that we've shown a couple of times, it's from 1990. And
Right.
then we have things that you did over the summer of 2021, like these things over my shoulder
Right.
here.
Right.
So I, as not an artist, but I would say you would have improved. Yeah, so speaking, I think, off of the idea that so much of this comes from you and your life, and I think then we can talk about sort of who these people are, since so much of this is portraiture. And so who are these people, I guess, is, and I mean that kind of almost very concretely.
There's the core from the church, the Southern, I used to call it my Southern style, because I'm from Georgia, Southern. So you see the church ladies, you see the barbershop, and those come from influence of feeling this connection with my, African American community that I was raised in. I knew the people in the barbershop. I knew ladies going to church, and I know how important that was to them to go to church, because this was one place they could go where they would be respected, because the community I grew up in didn't really respect them. I grew up not far from where Ahmaud Arbery was killed. That's where I came from. And so the church and dressing up, and they'd be called Miss Caledonia. Always put a handle on your name because you're important. And some people don't understand the importance of that the culture in the South was not, you didn't call people, you call them by their first name. No matter, I have a patient, I'm doing this other project Mike and I are doing, and I talked with this patient to this day. She's 96 years old, and you want to get her stirred up. She talks about the fact that she said you call the little 2-year-old Miss Lunda, and you are 90 years old, and they call you by your first name. But they could go to church, and they could dress and value themselves in an environment that was respectful. So when I put those ladies ready to go to church, I knew what it meant to them. And it meant to me to see them all dressed up, because that community touched my life in several ways. And so that is a group. And then this thing with women, like Dr. Cross-Hammer was talking about, these women of power, Ida B. Wells and Shirley Chisholm. I needed to do them because they paved so much for me, especially for me that did work, this idea of lynching. Ida B. Wells, the fact that she could never go back home again, because if she came, they planned that they would kill her, because she did work centered around lynching. Shirley Chisholm, that group of women, Chloe was Toni Morrison, I couldn't think of the name earlier, and what they gave in a culture that gave them little respect. But I felt that if I could put them on a canvas and they would be, they would get, I could give them respect they needed. And I put several of the ladies in white because of the suffrage movement. And March the 5th, 1913, they didn't allow Black women to be a part of the core march. They made them get at the back of the line. So I sort of put them in a white dress as a rebelling in a little way, that they did a lot for the suffrage movement, Ida B. Wells. And so I respect and I appreciate what they did. So I put them in white dresses, although the suffrage movement did not want them there. Several of them were there. And I just want my way of saying thanks to them. And hopefully I've done that in most of my painting, reflecting on African-American culture, in that the barbershop, that elderly man got his hand on that little boy's head, that, this wasn't his first rodeo. I wonder how many kids went to him to get their hair cut. That sense of community. Little boy didn't want to be there, but he was there. And that man was there with his hand on his head. Thousands of kids probably came to him. And that sense of caring for you in that community is something that will always be with me. When I was in the 2nd grade and I got chicken pox, and everybody in the community heard about, my father named Eddie Baby sick. And I peeped through the blinds and I saw about 5 ladies out front. They had bags, they had jars with stuff in them. I guess those would take turns to treat me. And I said, if they put one more thing on my chest, I felt it's gonna cave in. But they came because that sense of community. And it was genuine for me. And I hopefully I can express that in my work.
Yeah, I think there is definitely a feeling of community here in the gallery. And I think, like you said, it's certainly what Dr. Krauthammer, gets at in her portion of the evening, talking about sort of depictions, how needed it is to have depictions of Black people as they are, as beautiful, as dignified, as having a terrible time in the barbershop chair. All of those things are very real. And I think there's certainly room to, talk more about that. So perhaps you, Shirley, or Dr. Krauthammer could speak to those things a little bit more, because it's difficult for me in my position to really show that.
Barbara, you want to say anything, or you want me to just?
I'm almost speechless because I love hearing you talk about the work and about the stories. But again, as I said, what was so striking to me looking at this work, thinking about tonight, was really seeing, like the centuries long thread in how Black people, how we have positioned ourselves and created our own images. And so I loved what you said in the very beginning in your opening remarks of, you wanted art with Black people in it and you couldn't find it, so you created it. And it makes me think of people like Sojourner Truth, Shirley Chisholm in her folding chair, Ida B. Wells, the women you've painted, who have said effectively in their own lives and careers said, right, I didn't see myself there, so I put myself there, right? I made that space for myself. And for me, that's really, and so I think about the history of photography again, which is, where some of my research is, and how important photography was to Black families in the early 20th century, from the time of emancipation, right? 1860s, 1870s, into the early 20th century, of documenting families, right? Having those family portraits and displaying them with pride.
Yes.
Right. And being able to claim, right, that's my family. And for people who are sometimes years, barely generations out of enslavement, right, to claim, right, that person, I'm connected to that person and they are beautiful and I see them for who they are, right, as a loved one, not as somebody's employee or property. And for me, that's what your work, those portraits of those women, those paintings does, of that sense of, you know, I see you and I am connected to you. And I think it's really just beautiful, like deeply beautiful.
Thank you. The little town that I grew up in, we didn't really have newspapers, you know, like now we didn't have Facebook and all this kind of stuff. We can go and read about stuff. But I did a painting when I did the usher board of them with a fan. Fans were, I mean, some people didn't have access to photographs. And but the fan usually had on one side, it was a form of advertisement. It had families. I got one on this painting that I did of a little girl with her mother, and they both have gloves on. And I remember being in church and I would just look at those pictures of Black families. They would have families together, little girl with her mother, the father, and you would sit there, you know, you're supposed to be listening to the sermon, but those paintings, but those photographs. So I put that on a painting because that was so important. And it was advertisement. One side they'll say, in my little hometown, Fluker Funeral Home, I elect so-and-so and so-and-so, Robert E. Lee gonna, you know, run for some. And so that was advertisement on one side because there was no way to advertise other than that fan at church because there was no newspaper advertising. And on the other side was these beautiful photographs of Black families. The little girl with her mother holding her little, something they was together, but both gloves. And I remember I used to wear gloves to church as a picture of Michelle Obama with gloves on. And I know she's going to church. No one had to tell me. I know she was going to church because that was a big deal of the weather. And that was a part of it. But those fans, I love them. I love them. And I try to, when I find some to collect, but those from the way, you know, before we had access to newspaper, which my little town has now. But so photographs, it imprinted so much on your mind. And so sometimes I do that with my painting, that it imprint a positive image, like on those church fans.
Yeah, I think you spoke really well. I think the idea of something being photographic is a very interesting way and an apt way to talk about your work, because there's this beautiful of a simplicity of capturing just a simple moment, and also just I think capturing, having the moment speak to something broader than just what it is. And that'd be, I think, a good pivot point to talk about Ashes to Ashes a little bit more. And to talk about it as capturing a moment of a performance. And so I think Michael talked really well about how the book came out of the performance in this sort of logistical sense, but what does it mean? Yeah, does the book still resonate as a performance to you at all? And maybe even, you know, Michael or John, you could speak to this as well, having handled the book in person.
I think it's an ongoing performance because it's like the rubber band. It was a point in time, but when in this country, things about lynching people are still talking about Floyd being lynched. So the idea of remembering these people and respecting that this is a part of our the American culture, especially now when they're trying to remove anything from teaching kids about what impact a certain race. The kids won't have the opportunity, won't know about it. I don't know when they'll learn about, when it's good to learn about lynching. But if your father or mother was lynched, you learn really early about lynching. And I think that it's ongoing, although those names that are on the broad side is from a point in time. The point keep moving out, the other end keep being extended, because I get letters from people telling me about their relatives who were lynched, and his name isn't on that sheet. And we know it's incomplete, because the Klan, when I was in medical school, the morning after you've been on call all night, the next morning you have morning report. The Klan didn't have morning report where they list all the people they had, killed during the night. So I know that it's incomplete, and I know that it hasn't stopped. Like someone showed me something, said this was the last lynching in America, and I'm saying, I don't think you can say that yet. So is it ongoing? Yes. Will it have an impact? Hopefully. I think with Michael's help, I was able to accomplish some of the things I wanted to do with that. Although a book wasn't on my agenda, Michael, he recommended it, and it was a good idea. I think that it's something that is documented and it'll be there. And plus, with the impact that some of the books have, some Winford work is included, I think that makes it even more powerful.
I could add, am I there? I could add that what I learned from my teacher, Leonard Baskin, one of the things he used to talk about was the great gift, which what he meant was in visual arts that there were all these different media that that you could explore the same theme in different ways. And I think that while the book is very different from the event, from the celebration that Shirley was able to put together, it exists in another level, and isn't, the object is not to recreate the performance, but to exist on another level and talk about some of the same things, and those things change in another form. And that's, I think, what Shirley's getting at with the idea of an ongoing conversation. So just leave it there.
True.
Yeah, I think very well said. Thank you for that. And so now, if there's anyone who has questions to put in the chat, that'd be great. There is one there. So Shirley, could you talk about the fans you distributed in barbershops in Springfield, encouraging men to get their blood pressure checked?
Oh my goodness. Oh God, that was long. Okay, I always think fans are very versatile. I will use whatever I can to get people to take care of themselves and respect their bodies. And I thought the fan people can use forever. And it's a way that people can hold something they can hold in their hand, they can look at. I think that is important, and to share some, give them something, and they tend to register it a little more. I had forgotten about the fans So someone must have gotten one and remembered. And I used to have this saying, is your blood pressure less than 140/90? If not, why not? And people will come up to me and say that. So some things I've done, hopefully had, the fan for one, may have had a positive impact. And the fan is an art form. It was I think one of my paintings was on the front of it. I think may have been the church ladies. And it's something that you can distribute it to possibly all over the world if you want. But it's something, a takeaway of something that's already a part of the culture that people feel very blessed or happy to have.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, we talked about your diversity of talent and all the different media that are here, and you also make fans. Is
that something? Jesus.
You just keep going.
Something I just wipe away. I forgot I did it, you know. My husband real good. He remembers all this stuff. Some stuff I forget that I've done. Hopefully the things that I've done have been positive, and hopefully I think the fans may have been that. So that's good.
That's good. Well, if there are no more questions, let's put a last call. But we've reached about 7:20, so I think this is about when Zoom fatigue hits in for a lot of people. But I want to thank first Shirley. Thank you so much for gracing our exhibit or our gallery with your exhibit. It's just such a treat to have. And thank you to you and the rest of our panelists for joining us this evening. Thank you to our audience for taking part as well. And as for that, I think that's all we've got.
Thank you. You know, you've done a lot of work, and a lot of people have seen my work, and for that I'm very grateful. And I hope that it has a positive impact. And you've done an excellent job. You, Anne, and everyone in that, you know, have kept my ladies, my people happy. They seem to be smiling back there. So good.
I try.
You do. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Good night.
Night. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Mhm.